Thanks, Simon, and huge congratulations to yourself and your team and everyone else at the Oxford Botanic Garden for this fantastic celebration. 400 years is an amazing age. And what I'd like to talk about today is how artificial intelligence and some other new technologies can help us to really understand how biodiversity is changing over time in space and how to prioritize our efforts and resources for the conservation and study of biological diversity across the globe. What I'd like to do is just to give you a bit of context of why this is so absolutely crucial for us today. Of course, we know we are living in an age of extinction. About 1 million species now face extinction. That's an estimation that is based on both current assessment of extinction threats for species, but also the predictions of the species that haven't been assessed so far. And that includes about 2 in 5 plant species, a number that my colleagues at Kew and collaborators have come up with. And at the same time as so many species are likely to disappear unless we drastically change conditions for them, we're also discovering many new species to science, and about 2,000 new plant species and 2,000 new fungal species previously unknown to scientists, sometimes to local people, but those are being described every single year. And we think now that about 20 or more % of all plant species and over 95% of all fungal species still remain unknown to scientists. So at the same time as we're discovering this amazing diversity of plants, fungi, and other species as well, we're probably losing them faster than we can find them. And of course, many of those effects are being caused by change to the environment, especially in the tropics, including in South America or Brazil, where I come from. And many of those ecosystems are now being replaced to give space for soybeans and oil palms and other commodities. But we don't have to be looking that far. And even here, closer to home, the changes are also very drastic. England, for instance, has lost about 90% of all natural wetlands, and that's an ecosystem which is very diverse, both for plants but also animals. It plays important roles for carbon sequestration and retention. It also affects the leakage of nutrients into the oceans and our marine life. So overall, across the world, both on land and at sea, the change we're doing to environments is believed to be the #1 cause to the threat of species of both plants and animals, which is of course a very dire picture, and we're just trying to understand now where the biggest effects are going to be. And alongside habitat change, we have the effects of climate change. And we of course know that climate change is affecting everyone on this planet. There have been massive change in temperature over the last 170 years. Many of you have seen this figure before, I believe, and that really shows how temperatures have been changing, and especially in the last few decades, of the temperature extremes and those effects, both for our own lives but also for species, is something that we need to understand so that we can focus our attention to protect species against the effects of climate change. So the big question here is, how do habitat change and global warming affect biodiversity? And we need to answer this question really to understand how to best focus our policies, our investments in conservation, so that we can lead to mitigation of climate change and habitat loss. What I'd like to do now is really to walk you through 3 projects that some collaborators and myself have been working on in the use of artificial intelligence to help us understand those changes and look at both short-term scales but also a bit longer time scales, so that we can learn a bit more from the data available. And that's combining both observations and records stored in our botanic gardens, in our herbaria, in other collections, but also some data gathered through new technologies, as I'm going to show in a minute. The first example here is a project I've been working on together with Daniele Silvestri in Switzerland, and also now Kieran, a new postdoc, joining our group. And it's really about understanding which areas should be protected to conserve as many species and as much diversity as possible. We've been using a technique within artificial intelligence called reinforcement learning, and that's something that people have been using in gaming and finances for some time now, but I don't really think it has been applied in conservation before. And I know this is a busy diagram, but it's basically just to show how the system works. So it's a platform, as you see, there's a loop between two main blocks, and the system evolves. And the system here is this square with a number of species and individuals, and that changes over time as there's human disturbance, but also climate change. And depending on how the system changes, it's going to inform a neural network and train a model to understand what's the outcome of that. So basically, if you have a lot of disturbance in an area, some species are going to be affected more than others because they have different sensitivities. And that then leads to some species disappearing and others potentially even increasing. And that goes around so that it informs which places those protected areas should be placed to lead to the best outcomes depending on what we're trying to optimize. I'll show a detail of this in my next slide. And what you can see here is just a zoom of the first diagram I showed you. And that's a simulation system that we've been developing. And we've also been applying this to empirical systems, especially Madagascar. And of course, with simulation, we know exactly what the truth should look like. So it's a bit easier to really measure how this methodology is working. So we have a grid, and that consists of many different cells. And within each cell, there is a number of individuals and species, and that evolves over time. So species expand their range, and those that are affected by human disturbances will probably decrease in abundance and perhaps disappear. But then we can put a protection unit around some grid, some cells, and that will protect the species within it, often with an edge effect. So an area where it's a bit too close to the borders and species are still being affected, but a bit less than that. And what you can do here is that you can let this system evolve over time. And that's what this figure here shows, where basically over time, the areas that are protected will preserve a higher density of species within each one of those blocks. And you see here in red, that's the areas that have been affected by humans. It could be roads, or it could be cities, it could be something that it has a negative impact on different species. But basically, this leads to a set of different areas, all under a limited budget, because of course we cannot protect everything. We need to choose carefully which areas to protect. And this system really leads to a major improvement compared to the random protection of areas, or if you use one of the most used software in the field of systematic conservation planning called MarkSun as well. And this is for disturbance, so anthropogenic disturbance. When it comes to climate change, what happens that it doesn't help if you fence off a forest, for instance. Of course, climate change is still going to happen. Of course, there's a gradient of temperature, but also some extreme events, and that cannot be stopped by protection of areas. You need to think about that when designing reserves or protected areas, so that species can really have somewhere to migrate in case that's needed. But it does help protect species richness, or the number of species within each one of those protected areas. And the system is really powerful in identifying which of those cells, what's the traits that leads to the maximum protection of species within those. And that's also not only looking at how many species there are within each one of those, but also the complementarity. So you don't protect the same species all over again. So you try to maximize both the numbers of total species protected, but also their combined effect on species richness across the whole system. So basically, through a series of lots of simulations, we've really come up with this result where the protection using artificial intelligence here, reinforcement learning and neural networks, leads to a substantial improvement in the outcome of area protection. So basically, if you select areas across a landscape, let's say Madagascar or an island or a big forest, if you just select randomly where to protect, you get the square here in the middle, the gray one, the darker color, where there'll be a number of species. So there's an axis here for species richness, one for phylogenetic diversity, for value or economic value, and the total area protected. But if you use this kind of methodology, you will substantially increase both the species richness, the phylogenetic diversity value, and also the area protected. So that's A and B here, which are both ways of gathering data on a continuous basis. So basically, if we go to a place and we make an inventory of all species in every cell, so that's number one. Or if you go to this place and only record presence and absence, but you don't count individuals, so you don't count abundance, and that's something you can quite easily do with citizen science. A bit more error in the identification of species, but still you get a substantial improvement compared to the random selection of areas. But then in C here, you see that if you only do an initial monitoring, if you only estimate diversity and abundance of an area, but you don't go back, that's actually going to lead to a substantial decrease in the number of species protected. There will be decrease across each value, basically, which really means that you need to do recurrent monitoring of data over time. And the reason for this is, of course, because nature is very dynamic. We have climate change, we have human disturbance in many systems, which are, of course, affecting the status of many species. And we need to understand how those changes are affecting species individually, but also ecosystems at large. So through a series of many simulations and empirical data, we've been exploring the use of artificial intelligence to help us guide the identification of areas for protection. And that has some really interesting and promising results, I think. And of course, you look at this and then you think, okay, but what kind of system or situation would have as much data as needed for this kind of models? And of course, we know there are not that many systems or places where there is very recurrent data or very enough quality data to be able to identify those areas for protection. But at the same time, we know also that there are some new techniques where you can use environmental DNA, for instance, to identify presence and absence of species. We're all familiar with apps such as iNaturalist and others, which allow you to record species based on image recognition of previously identified species, and also now increasingly remote sensing techniques such as LiDAR that we're using a lot at Q, where you can both measure things like carbon storage of forests and calculate value in that way, but also identify individual species such as particular trees that are threatened or particularly valuable. And you can do that on a regular basis, and that's going to produce a much better outcome than doing an initial single monitoring of biodiversity and other values across an ecosystem. So I think moving ahead, we need to have ways of gathering data on a regular basis, and that's going to be fundamental to our ability to conserve species into the future. So my second example of using AI in conservation and biodiversity research is about speeding up red list assessments. And those are really important for any kind of investment for which species are going to receive funds for conservation. We know that the International Union for Conservation of Nature, so IUCN red list assessments, that's the golden standard used by every single country almost. And they're really powerful at the same time as they're quite expensive and resource demanding. So at Q, we're doing about a third of all the plant red list assessments. That takes about a day for a skilled assessor to do. And ideally, we not only want to increase the number of plants and even fungi that are assessed, but also do recurrent assessments to see how those assessments are changing over time. And you see here some different groups and how those assessments are actually showing that many species are more threatened over time than they were in the past. And there have been some different approaches to do that. Alex Siska and Ima Niklugada Q, they're both working on ways of doing that together with some collaborators. One thing here is that you can either predict the exact red list category of each species, or you can predict them into being either threatened or non-threatened, where you have a bit higher accuracy for that. And that's something you can measure against your training data set. So I think it's a really powerful way of doing that. We've been looking at automated red list assessment together with many colleagues over the last year for Madagascar, for both plants and animals. And the graph here in the middle shows some of the assessments that have been made already for species by the IUCN, and some of the estimations we're doing with machine learning approaches, such as the black lines here in this graph. And in some cases, there's a good match, but in other cases, there is either over or under representation or under assessment of the threat risk for different species. And many of those models are actually quite simplistic. I think moving ahead, we're also looking into ways of increasing the accuracy and making those more biologically realistic, so that we can incorporate not only biological variables, biodiversity, environment, and human impact, but also some socioeconomic factors which can help us understand which species are most likely to be very threatened or not threatened at all, so that we can concentrate our resources to look more carefully at a subset of those species that haven't been assessed so far. My third example here about using AI in conservation biodiversity is actually a project we've been doing with Caroline Stromberg in the US and Toby Underman, who have been very interested in reconstructing vegetation changes over time. And we were actually interested in this because we were keen to see how Madagascar may have changed over time, because there's been a lot of discussion about how much rainforest and how much open habitats there have been across the country. Some people speculating that it was mostly rainforest, but actually there seems to be some indication that it's not the case, that there were quite a lot of natural grasslands across the country, but quite much, exactly how much is not well known. But for this case here, we developed a method and applied that to North America, which is a region that has a lot of fossil records, and past vegetation is quite known. So we had something to compare with. And what Toby in particular has been doing here is really to look at associations of taxa over time. So both plants and animals co-occurring, and what that can tell in terms of the kind of vegetation they will leave. So beavers, for instance, are very associated with forests and trees that have fell, and using those associations to predict gaps in the fossil record over time and space. So basically training a Bayesian neural network, which not only gives you a yes and no answer, but also an estimation of the certainty around those estimates. And over time, we can actually get some really high precision maps of how vegetation has changed over time. And that's something that is really interesting, because it could be applied to other systems in other countries and continents as well. So for instance, we can also measure the accuracy comparing the current day and the outcomes of outputs of our model. And we can also understand, or at least infer, how change in vegetation between forests and open habitats have taken place over time. And that's something that really can help us understand a bit also the future impact of climate change on vegetation, which of course is going to be challenging because it's different time scales. So in summary, I just would like to make the point that big challenges such as biodiversity loss caused by climate change and habitat changes is a huge challenge, and that requires a lot of data as well for us to be confident. The recurrent gathering of data, perhaps even at near real time, is going to be very critical. We can't just rely on historical collections. We need to integrate them with time series also going to the future. And AI is providing some really interesting, powerful, and underexplored tools to help us in that pursuit. And that's it. I'm very excited to have a discussion a bit later in the Q&A. And thanks so much for listening.